Welcome to Leaders Get Real. Inspirational interviews with today's authentic leaders. I'm your host, Christy Tong, bringing you insightful interviews with best-selling authors and with leaders who are purposeful, passionate, and authentic. Gain compelling insights as they share the challenges and rewards of leading with authenticity and impact. Welcome to today's interview. I'm so glad you've tuned in for my conversation with Jennifer Dulski. If you want to make a change at your company or in your community or in the world, listen in. You'll be inspired by this chat. Here with me today is Jennifer Dulski, author of the book Purposeful, and Jen is also the head of groups and communities at Facebook. And Jen, I have been so energized by your book and really looking forward to this chat. Welcome to Leaders Get Real.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Well, in my Leaders Get Real interviews, I featured two types of guests: authors with stellar frameworks or tools to equip leaders for impact, and the other is inspiring leaders who are in the trenches, leading in organizations, who can share their real experiences. And Jen, you represent both, so we have a lot to talk about.
Great. Can't wait.
So first, let's talk about your book, Purposeful, which came out this year. Purposeful subtitle is, Are You a Manager or a Movement Starter? Tell us about the premise of the book and what led you to write it.
So the premise of Purposeful is that all of us have the power to be movement starters. And what prompted me to write it was that I have been so fortunate in my career to be able to see ordinary people igniting extraordinary change in the world, whether they were activists who were starting change.org petitions or entrepreneurs I had the chance to work with. I basically have been able to see what makes people successful in starting movements in the world. And I wanted to share the lessons that I learned from all these people with more of us so that more people would believe that they could do it too.
Great. Well, we're going to want to talk a lot about a lot of the concepts in the book. And at the same time, we were just talking about you being a leader as well in the trenches. So let's talk a minute about your role as a leader. When you're not writing a book, you're busy being the head of groups and communities at Facebook, which is a fast-paced place to be. So tell us about what you're responsible for in that role.
So Facebook's mission is to give people the power to build community and to bring the world closer together. And I lead the groups product, which is a key part of that mission. It's used by more than 1.4 billion people every month to connect to other people around the interests, causes, and passions that matter to them. And I also help Facebook think about other ways to integrate community throughout our products. So things like Watch Party, which we just launched, which let people come together when they're watching a video and they want to share that experience together.
Great. So you are overseeing groups and communities. And when you say 1.4 billion every month, that's in groups. That's not just users of Facebook.
Exactly.
So you've got a tremendous span in your area alone that you're overseeing.
It's pretty amazing. I have to say, I am just in awe every day of all the communities that there are. I often say, like, there's a group out there for everyone. Whatever is the thing that makes people feel different or unusual or the thing they're struggling with, there are other people out there, and these people are finding each other in communities on Facebook. And it resonates even with me personally. I actually joined what we call a meaningful community. My personal one is called Grown and Flown Parents, which is a group for parents of teenagers and college kids. And when you see the kinds of communities that get built, it's just so inspiring. And there was a woman last week in the group whose daughter was in a car accident. And she posted into the group, I don't know what to do. I just got a text. My daughter's being rushed to the ER. She was in a car accident. I'm in Philadelphia and she's in Texas. And within minutes, there were hundreds of parents who posted in the group, I live in Texas, I'm an hour away, I'm a nurse, I can go to the ER. And it's like, I was practically crying reading this post because myself, I now have a daughter in college and I'm across the country from her, and thinking about being part of this community of parents that would be there for my child the way I would want to be there for theirs. It's really quite meaningful.
That's fabulous. Now, when it comes to your leadership, you have so many incredible experiences to draw from for our conversation, and I'm going to just run down a little bit of your background. You were an early employee at Yahoo, and you rose up to a VP. Then you left Yahoo, and you became co-founder and CEO of a startup called DealMap, a mobile deal site that got acquired by Google, which made you the first woman to sell a company to Google. And then after 2 years as a Google exec, you became the president of a social enterprise company, Change.org. Whew. What a great range
exhausting.
of experiences. Now let's pause there. Tell us about Change.org.
Yeah, Change.org is an incredible company and was an amazing experience for me personally. The mission is to empower people everywhere to create the change that they want to see in the world. And that's what happens. Again, regular people standing up for the things that they believe in. They start campaigns, persuade decision makers, and create change in the world.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I've been so moved as I've learned more about Change.org and following some of the impact and some of those campaigns. Now, since you're a very humble person, let me brag on you and say that Change.org grew from 18 million users to over 180 million users under your leadership. Wow.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
That's
time.
quite.
And they're still growing today. I mean, the amazing thing, it keeps going and getting bigger every day.
That's quite a movement you started. And speaking of movement, the subtitle of your book is Are You a Manager or a Movement Starter? And clearly you are both, with all that managerial experience and starting some incredible movements. And in your book, you say that every single person has the capacity to start a movement. And you say they don't have to be a Nelson Mandela or a Gloria Steinem. What are some examples of ordinary individuals who you've seen do that at Facebook or at Change.org who have inspired you?
Yeah, there are so many incredible examples of people who have become movement starters. And the way that I define this, the concept of are you a manager or a movement starter, of course, there's value in being both. But I often say that managers, they do the best with what they're given. And movement starters take that to the next level. They say there must be more that we can do. They push the boundaries just a little bit further. And they ask themselves when they see something broken or wrong that they want to change, why not me? Why don't I be the person that does something about this? And some of the examples that I love, one is a young woman, a teenage girl from Mississippi named Sarah Kavanaugh. She was a high school athlete, used to drink a lot of Gatorade, and one day was looking at the bottle and saw an ingredient she didn't recognize. Turns out to be a pretty harmful chemical called brominated vegetable oil that's already banned in Japan. And she had tens of thousands of people, I think ultimately over 100,000 people signed her petition asking Gatorade to take it out of their drink. And she loved Gatorade. She still does. And she's a fan and wanted to keep drinking it, but in a healthy way. And she successfully persuaded Pepsi not only to take BVO out of Gatorade, but she persuaded ultimately both Pepsi and Coke to take BVO out of all of their soft drinks. So regular person standing up for something that's going to help all of us. And in the end, it was good for both of their brands to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. I love that, a couple of your stories are kids.
Right.
Kids. So it's not just that anybody can be, but if kids can be movement starters, how inspiring is that for us grown-ups that anyone can be?
That's right. Everyone can do it. I've seen children, I've seen grandparents, I've seen people who are incarcerated. Really, anybody can step up and make the difference they want to.
Now, let's keep making the connection, just as your title alludes to, a manager or a movement starter. And a manager, we can imagine inside organizations or corporations. And one of the things you touch on in your book about, starting a movement is the question of what holds us back. And you talk about a social change expert that outlines 4 basic reasons why people don't take actions to create change. The expert says they lack support, they don't have the tools, they have no funding, they don't believe they can succeed. Now, those things they found are true in social change, but I hear that inside corporations when I'm working as a consultant and an executive coach. Do you hear that as well?
I do. And it's actually the reason why half the stories in Purposeful are activists and the other half are business people. The themes are quite common. Yes.
So on that note, we hear those things from, leaders, managers. I can't change that because I don't have the support or there's no budget. And one of those 4, though, has been more significant than the others. Can you speak to which of those 4 reasons holds us back most often?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that tends to be the strongest is belief. People just don't believe that they can do it. And so it's actually one of the primary reasons that I wrote Purposeful to begin with, is that the more we hear and see other examples of people doing it, the more that we believe we can. The other thing that I think helps with belief is that sometimes it's just seeing a little change that makes a difference. So for instance, I talk about movements that they all start with small actions. Actually, there's a great interview today by Jeff Bezos who says, even Amazon started small. Like, he remembers when he was driving the truck around himself, delivering packages to people. And we all think of it as this enormous thing, but it didn't start that way. And so I often liken movements to starting a standing ovation. And I ask people, and I go talk to groups about this. I say, how many of you have ever started a standing ovation? So have you, Christy, ever started one?
I'm trying to think. I might have been the one to spark applause to start. I don't know if I was actually standing, but I get that.
When I ask large groups, it's amazing. Usually only 1 or 2 people will ever say yes. Vast majority of people do not do this. And the reason is it's scary. Like, it's actually scary to stand up and expose yourself in front of people doing something that they might not join you in. But the follow-up question to that is, how many of you have ever been to a show where only one person stood up and no one joined them? And it is even more rare. Like, I rarely have anyone say yes to that question, which just suggests that it's like that initial brave step that you have to do. And once you take that first step, everything else seems easier in comparison. And almost always, if you're willing to be a little bit brave and you're willing to ask people to help you, because that's what a standing ovation does. It basically says, please join me in standing up. That's what makes movements start. And the first action that works is what causes the ripple effect.
Can you think of someone in a corporate example who started a standing ovation, so to speak, or started
all the time, right? I think this happens every day in our organizations. I was talking to a woman. So we have a Facebook group for Purposeful for anyone who wants to join it, and whether or not they've read the book. And there was a woman in the group who was talking about having started the sustainability program at her office. And she works for a big company. And she said, she pitched this idea, and first she got a few people on board, and then she had a small committee, and then they were able to persuade one champion, and then that champion helped them, get it across. And now it started in one office, and now they're rolling it out to all their offices around the world. And because this company is large, she will be able to have an actual impact on the world just by influencing her own company. So there are examples like that happening all over the place.
Outstanding example. Now, back to the discussion, we discussed why people don't start something. And the most important reason, or the most common reason, isn't so much they don't have the tools or the funding or the support, but it's they don't believe that they can succeed. And that just, when I stop to think about that, I just think what a wake-up call that is for senior leaders. That if the number one reason really is that they don't think, well, senior management will never go for it, or my boss will shoot that down, or I've tried and I got no, and I tried again and nobody listened. And so it just strikes me what a wake up that call that is for, managers, executives, to create the environment where even if it feels there's no time, even if it feels like it's not the top priority, that they still create the environment to say yes, or to allow people to experiment or to have a voice.
It's absolutely so true. And there are so many ways to do this, even without having it be very costly or risk precedent.
That's what you described for the movement starter, is they're not so concerned with what the constraints or what they have, but they're thinking about this matters. So how do we make this happen?
That's right. And I think if you were to put those steps in order, the first step is belief. The second step is support, right? Because even though individuals are the ones who start movements, they are the first in the standing ovation, you don't have a movement until you have followers and supporters. And so I talk a bit about how to encourage and embrace those first supporters. The key first step is asking for help. But once you ask for help, it's critical to find ways for those people to participate that are meaningful.
That's terrific. When I started reading some of these themes in your book, the chapter on Start a Standing Ovation, I immediately thought of the video I had seen about first followers.
Yes.
And then later you had it in your book. So you want to say what that video is? Anybody can Google a TED Talk on first followers.
Yes, this is a great TED Talk by Derek Sivers. It's a very short TED Talk, about 3 minutes, which is the length of this original video. And basically what he shows in the video is we'll call him dancing man. He is a shirtless, very enthusiastic dancing man on a hill outside a concert. And for a couple minutes, he's dancing on his own. And then eventually one person stands up to join him. And the key here is what the first dancer does. Instead of just dancing alongside him, he really actively embraces him. Literally, he grabs his hands, they're twirling around together. And because the two of them are having so much fun, then a couple more people get up and join them, and then a few more people, and ultimately the entire hillside is dancing with the dancing man.
So yeah, when it's the first person, they're crazy. When they're proposing something that seems like, a stretch beyond what's possible, but once there's those first followers, then suddenly it starts to begin drawing in other people to get on board, to give support, to participate.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. That's a fun video as well. The first chapter of your book, it's about purpose. And you say that movements are powerful because they're driven by a purpose, and purpose is contagious. Now, a lot of people think in business that purpose and profit are separate. Where does purpose fit? Where does purpose fit in for a corporate manager?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that it's important to understand how I'm defining purpose and vision in the book. So I talk about a vision as being someone's desired future for the world, and a purpose as being the reason why that vision matters to you. And there are many, many stories of how this crosses the corporate world. One of them that I really like is a story about Kara Goldin, who's the founder of Hint Water. And she envisioned a world where people could have drinks that tasted good, but without a lot of added sugar, to make people healthier and lower rates of obesity, diabetes, et cetera. Her purpose, the reason why this mattered to her, is because she was a tech exec who had 3 children and was struggling with her own weight. And she realized that part of the reason that was the case is because she was drinking so much diet soda, which was really bad for her. And when she cut out diet soda, she ended up losing 50 pounds. But she didn't really love the taste of water, which is what she had substituted it. And so she created Hint Water. And Hint has now become a highly successful company, $100 million more in sales. And the reason why you can tell this is a movement around a purpose is because their second product was not another beverage, it was a sunscreen. She said, if I'm trying to make people healthier, one of the other products I see that's problematic is sunscreen, which has a lot of chemicals in it. And what if I could take the chemicals out and use the same scent, use the same fruit I'm using for Hint Water to scent the sunscreen? And when she launched that sunscreen, 60% of all people who had ever bought Hint beverages online bought her sunscreen too. And so the purpose behind her brand is what's attracting her customers. And that's true of big companies too. And there's a lot of research that says this now. There's a study from Harvard Business Review that I like that says 64% of people say that a brand's values are the reason why they do business with that brand.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking about being a movement starter, and the first step is to start a standing ovation or to take that first step. And you say that anybody can start a chain reaction. And sometimes, these stories of movement starters can feel a bit far removed. But you were a living example as a young college student at Cornell wanting to row crew. Will you share that story?
Sure. So I was not actually a rower. If you meet me in person, you'll see that I'm 5 feet tall. So I was a coxswain on the crew team, which is a role that is not widely understood. But the short version of describing it is that coxswains sit in the back of the boat, they steer during the race, and they strategize races and coach rowers to be their best and to try to win the race. And I had done this in high school for the men's crew team at my high school. And when I got to Cornell, I thought I will cox the men's crew team here too, because I was good at it. That's what I knew how to do. And when I got there, they said, you can't do that. Only men can cox men's crew and women have to go on the women's team. And I said, why? To me, it didn't make sense. I said, well, I'm really good at this. You ought to just at least let me try out. And they said, no, sorry. And I took it to the coach. I took it to the varsity coach. I ultimately took it to the athletic director of the university. All of them said no. And the reasons they gave me at the time were things like, you'll be too distracting to the men on the team. And, that was quite frustrating to me. Years later, there was a great meme on Twitter about women scientists and how they were told they would be distracting. And if you go look on Twitter, there are some hilarious tweets of women, in their hazmat suits or like holding tubes of cheetah poop that are all hashtagged distractingly sexy. Anyway, so I tried as hard as I could at the time. And in retrospect, had I had online petitions or something, perhaps I might have done more. But at the time, I actually decided I would go ahead and join the women's team and met a great group of women rowers. And then a few months later, the athletic director of the university called me and he said, we've been thinking about your proposal and we've decided to change our minds. And we will let women cox the men's crew team. And if you want, you can switch teams. And at the time, I decided not to because I had already joined a team and expressed my loyalty to them. And we ended up winning nationals that year, by the way. But the rule got changed. And I felt like this was one of my first experiences in my own starting of a movement or becoming an activist, in that I wasn't fighting that fight just for me. I was fighting it for all the women who might come after me. And a few years ago, I went back to Cornell and I asked someone there, how many of the coxswains on the men's crew team are women? And she said to me, oh, almost all of them. It just makes sense. I was like, yep, it does.
And that goes well beyond Cornell. Isn't it true that now, women coxing male crews has become the norm at most universities?
It is the norm. And it is the norm because women are quite good at it.
Mm-hmm. One of your chapters describes the need for purposeful leaders to persuade decision makers. I love the story of Manal, a young woman in the Middle East who influenced the CEO of Nike. Will you share that story?
Sure. Manal is an incredibly inspiring woman. She has a personal story that's quite touching and difficult, which is that when she was 19 years old, she was on a fun bus trip with her cousin, and they were playing a game and they switched seats. And then 5 minutes later, the bus got in a horrible accident, rolled over 3 times, and Manal's cousin ended up dying later from that accident. And so she had this moment in her life that just struck her to her core. And it actually ended up making her much closer to her Muslim faith. And she decided to start wearing the hijab, which is the Muslim women's head covering. And she, over time, she faced a fair amount of discrimination from that. And so she started a Facebook group called Surviving Hijab. And she invited 50 women to this group. And now, several years later, that group is more than 500,000 women all around the world who are sharing and celebrating each other for this choice that they've made. And in addition to starting this community, Manal is also an athlete. She's a very active runner. And it was difficult for her to run in her hijab because there wasn't any appropriate gear. And she would also face even more discrimination of people asking her, why are you running in all of those layers, et cetera. And so she took a very bold step, which is that she found a contact at Nike and she sent them a direct email that said, "Why no veiled women runners?" And she asked them, you have this audience of runners in the Middle East. Why aren't there any products for them? Why aren't they featured in any of your advertising? And because she had this group of 500,000 women behind her, they responded. And they talked to Manal and they met her. And ultimately, they ended up launching a line of gear called Nike Pro Hijab, which just came out in January of 2018. And she and a couple other Muslim women athletes were the inspiration behind this.
Great. Now, what advice would you give to leaders inside organizations? You've seen many who have had campaigns and who have impacted things perhaps from outside organizations and getting Nike or getting Pepsi or Gatorade to, change something. But what advice would you give to leaders inside who feel they can't influence things above them based on their position?
Yeah, so I would say that is definitely not true. I know it's possible, and I've seen many, many people do this. The key is understanding the strategies behind how you do that. And it's the reason why I wrote a chapter on persuading decision makers in Purposeful. And there are a few techniques I describe that are really usable by people inside organizations, one of which is called influence mapping. So it's a key tool used by social organizers that business people can use to understand the people that you're trying to persuade and the other people who motivate them. So an example that I love is from Luann Calvert, who used to be the CMO of Virgin America. And granted, CMO is quite a senior title, but I think the same strategy could have worked even if she were more junior in the organization. And her story is around the safety video for the airline, Virgin America. They had previously had a very well-loved animated safety video that didn't meet the standards of the FAA. And so she had to replace it. And she had this crazy idea for a musical rhyming safety video that she was quite nervous she couldn't get the CEO to approve. And so because she knew it was risky, she did the influence mapping, thought about all the people who might be able to help her persuade the CEO. She took the video to all the other executives. She took it to flight attendants. She took it to loyal, frequent flyers, and she had everybody on board. So by the time they went to meet the CEO, all her ducks were in a row. And she said she presented this video and he said, "Oh, I don't know. I think the music might really grate on you over time." And one of the people that was in her camp by that point, who at the time was the COO of Virgin America, said, "I disagree. I think the more you listen to it, the more you love it." And that one person was enough to change the mind of the CEO.
First follower.
Exactly. So some of it is just getting the right people in your camp and understanding how to influence the person you're trying to persuade.
That's excellent. And I think it's so common to think that inside the organization you can't have that effect. And you really point out that having strategy, being thoughtful, and applying yourself around that can bring around some real success. Now, you are a purposeful person, and you've chosen to lead at Facebook. And that fits for me in my mind that you would choose Facebook, given some of the things I've observed Facebook do. For example, I was at a conference a few years ago where the head of engineering at Facebook was presenting research that Facebook was doing on compassion. And he shared that one of the most frequently requested features by users was to add an unlike button. And despite all the requests, Facebook chose not to do so. And instead, they developed steps to help people communicate with somebody whom they'd had differences in a way that maintained the relationship. And I was so struck by that. How many companies have their head of engineering steeped in research on compassion? That's awesome. Yeah. So what are ways you see Facebook being purposeful in its policy decisions or being a force for good in its initiatives?
Well, it's really the reason why I came to Facebook is because we care so much about making sure that the company is a force for good in the world. And, I see it every day in the work that I do. One example being that the primary goal of my team is to help 1 billion people connect to communities that they find meaningful in the world. We literally measure how meaningful something is, and we base our metrics around that. And then you just see all across Facebook things like our social good tools that help people in crises, like Safety Check. We launched something this year around being a safe source for blood donations, and we're now literally the largest source for blood donations in some countries in the world. And the things that happen helping local businesses get off the ground. So the stories that I see, I was telling you earlier about this group that I'm in for parents of college kids, and the story of the mother whose daughter was in a car accident. But what I didn't share is that this week in Hurricane Florence, literally thousands of kids are being evacuated from their colleges with no place to go. Most of them have no car, no money for a hotel room, and hundreds and hundreds of parents nearby who are in this group are offering their homes to students that they don't know, but they just met in a group on Facebook. So to me, that's worth getting up every day to do.
So that really is a driver, that you're creating tools that equip people to be a force for good themselves or to create support. Well, clearly from your book and your life, you believe passionately that people can make a difference. What's a cause that you care about, Jen, personally, and how are you involved in making a difference?
Well, I'd say two things. One is that my current cause is what I think of as a meta cause, really, that my goal right now is to help people believe and empower them to start their own movements. And I'm spending most of my time on this. Both doing talks around the book. I lead the Facebook group for Purposeful, helping people, start and help their movements grow. Before I found this kind of meta movement, my main passion was education. And I started my career as a high school teacher, and I founded the Pittsburgh site of an organization called Breakthrough, which helps kids be the first in their families to go to college. And I chaired the local site of that organization for about 5 years. So I'm also really, really passionate about education and the opportunity it gives to people.
That strikes a chord for me. You just hit my passion. I co-founded a nonprofit in my community for under-resourced kids with the intent, it's called Reach Potential Movement. And one of our signature programs is called Dream for College.
That's awesome.
And it's trying to expose kids at a young age who haven't had parents who have gone to college or know how to navigate that, and really expose them to the possibility that that can be a dream that comes true for them. And it has been extraordinary to be a part of seeing that happen for first-gen kids, to see that path and the dreams of their future and careers they never imagined become possible. And so I am excited to hear. It sounds like we've got a kindred passion.
It's true, and it's really incredible. I mean, the research shows that you break the cycle of poverty in people's families forever once you get one person to go to college. And so, the program I started is now, I believe it, 30 years old. And so thousands and thousands of kids have gone to college through that program now, which is something I feel personally really great about.
That's fabulous. Very inspiring. Those are the success stories, and those are the things that are energizing. But being a purposeful leader can get really discouraging at times. What advice would you give listeners if they're faced with a challenge or discouragement in bringing about change?
Well, the first thing I would say is it will happen. There are none of these stories that face zero challenges. So the thing that I've used in my life around this is to say, imagine it's like climbing a mountain. There's going to be a storm. Like when you climb Mount Everest, some days will be stormy and you have to hunker down and, know that the storm will pass. And great leaders and great movement starters are people who keep climbing, regardless of whether it's sunny or cloudy. And they inspire other people to keep climbing with them. And so a lot of it has to do with that resiliency and the attitude of knowing those days will come and also knowing they'll pass and being able to keep going through them.
Mm-hmm. Good reminders on the cloudy days and the storming days in particular. Great words. Well, as we plan to wrap up, my listeners love when guests offer an idea or a challenge for something that they can do immediately. So let's make it practical. Let's make it immediately applicable. What is an action that listeners can take tomorrow or in the next 48 hours to put these things into practice?
So I have three ideas here. First one is actually try starting a standing ovation. Like it is something so small, but all of us can do it. They might not be able to do it in 48 hours if they're not going to a show in 48 hours. But the next time you're in an audience of people, just try it. Stand up, be the one to be out there. And I've now done this a lot more since I wrote this book. And sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes you might be standing there like uncomfortably long, but I promise you people will join you. The second thing is that I have a saying I use. It's a horribly unelegant acronym that's ICTICTA, which stands for, if I can do this, I can do anything. And it's basically, if the standing ovation isn't the thing, pick some other thing that feels scary and just do it. And the more you do things that scare you, the less everything else seems scary in comparison. So if that thing is public speaking, then, try getting out there in front of a crowd. If it's, if it's getting in the water, like you go in the water, whatever the things are that scare you, do them. And then the last thing I would say is that people can join the Facebook group for Purposeful. If they have a movement that they're trying to build, it's at facebook.com/group/purposeful book. It's also, the link is on the website for the book. And it's a community of people who are here to support them.
Great. So we got to say ICTICTA and
right.
and be starting a standing ovation. I love that challenge. I have, like I said earlier, maybe I started clapping, but the standing ovation is a whole nother level. So you've encouraged me to try that one as well.
Let me know how it goes.
Yes. Well, Jen, you have been so inspiring by your experiences, by the framework that you have shared, and that certainly your book lays that out even more. But you completely made the case that anybody can be a movement starter, whether they're inside an organization, whether it's in their personal life, and that has a ripple effect that can create even more change from there.
I really hope that more people believe they can. That's my whole purpose. And I really thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for the inspiration. Thanks for tuning in today. If you'd like to get Jennifer's book, you can get this great read and support a great cause by clicking the Reads button at leadersgetreal.com to get it at our Amazon link for the same price, and a portion of your purchase will support vulnerable kids all over the world. Very cool. To get alerts for new interviews, subscribe at iTunes, leadersgetreal.com, or your favorite podcast app. And until next time, go forth and start a movement.